Okay, I call the December 19th, 2019 Disability Commission meeting to order. Welcome, we're here again. How's everyone in this frigid night? Single digits. Okay, so announcements. Welcome, newest Disability Commission member, Melissa Missy Lackey. And she was appointed, originally the meeting for the select board was going to occur on Tuesday the 17th, but occurred yesterday. So a shout out to Missy for being able to be here on short notice. Without you, we would not have a quorum. So also a shout out to Cindy Ide working in conjunction with Town Clerk Candy LaValle to do the email version of the appointment letter to allow you to be here. So thanks to them as well. Any other pertinent announcements? I have a couple of announcements. First, a shout out to Grafton native Chaz Davis on his first place finish in the United States Association for Blind Athletes Championship at the California International Marathon in Sacramento. And that was held recently on Sunday, December 8th. And Chaz finished in 2 hours, 43 minutes, 11 seconds, which in my world is super fast. So it would take me probably like 6 hours to finish a marathon. I basically walk. So shout out to Chaz. And also a shout out to Grafton native Ricky Duran on his second place finish this week in season 17 of The Voice and for his efforts regarding suicide awareness. So thank you, Ricky, regarding your efforts. And any other announcements that I may not be aware of regarding disability-related items? Okay. So the lone agenda item is a continuation of the ADA self-evaluation and transition plan, the 140 or so page document that was prepared by the Center for Living and Working for the town on the municipal side of things back in June. Our focus, based on our last meeting of November 21, was to focus on pages 51 through 81. And in looking at 51 through 81, which starts with the South Grafton Community Center, I want to just double back to our last meeting where it looked like there was a formatting error where if we look at pages 52 and 53, and even parts of 54, they actually were a continuation of the municipal center, the senior center and Veterans Hall. Mm-hmm. Do you recall whether we ended our discussion at our last meeting, whether we kind of moved forward to discuss pages 52 through 54? I
thought
recall.
we stopped at the senior center.
Okay, but what happened is that
It says here we were going to do 55 through 81
Yeah.
Okay.
this month, so we must
Okay.
have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the correction, Catherine. All right. So then my error on the reference to 51. So
I wouldn't have known if I hadn't had that note there. So
okay. And the other thing is that I wanted to call attention, and this may be the reference document that is one of the more prominent things, is that and actually I'm going to, for my own reference, I'm going to pop this page out because this is the legend regarding the use of the transition plan. And what ends up happening is if you look at any of the pages from a formatting perspective, and maybe this is for lack of space, each of the columns don't reference on each page what that column stands for, such as you would if you were looking
Repeat.
at it. It doesn't repeat. And so on the far right, the far right is the estimated cost, but the three columns before that are priority is the first column,
Go to any grid.
1 through 4. Ranking is the second column, 1 through 4. And then time frame is immediate term, 20 to 21. N is near term, 22 to 24. And then long term is 2026 to 2029, going approximately up to 10 years out. Now, under priority, I recall us discussing in our last meeting, and of course the prior meetings, but more specifically last meeting, tackling things on two fronts is that although it was easier or easiest to tackle some of the items that did not cost anything or were very minimal in cost or activity, that was one thing that would be tackled, but that wasn't always a top priority under the priority listing, that eventually all of this stuff needs to get done, and that we also discussed some type of focus on the accessible approach and entrance, that if you didn't have that, what good were a lot of the other items if you couldn't get into the building itself or an area of the building somewhere beyond that was less important to tackle. So we didn't want to put the cart before the horse and tackle the lower priority items necessarily. So, and I want to get the committee's thought or commission's thought on this item, is that so that we're not working in a vacuum. I know that a lot of times these capital items don't necessarily come before town meeting based on departments. There's a capital budget, and it's a myriad of items across the town. And that I would think sooner rather than later, as we're already into budget discussions for the coming fiscal year, is working with CIPC, Capital Improvement Planning Committee, to include these some priority items in the capital budget for the next fiscal year.
Does that mean that, for example, if we have, we'll take the senior center as an example, wouldn't any retrofitting done to, say, the senior center stage or some of the other items they note here, to create more accessible parking spaces, interior door widths to make them compliant, that wouldn't come out of the senior center budget?
I
mean, isn't there some part of their budget for maintenance, upkeep? I mean, wouldn't that be the same for the fire department and
I'm not sure of the specifics. I know that, for instance, I'll give you an example.
okay,
From a big ticket item, okay, health insurance is, at least up until recently, has been looked upon as a municipal item, regardless of how many school employees it encompasses, for example. I don't know whether or not, I know that, like, let's say we need a police car. I don't think that something of that magnitude would necessarily be under supply, like the supplies,
Yeah,
item. It would be under a greater capital budget, and then this particular department needs something.
Okay.
I don't think that maintenance items would be included, but we can clarify that with the town administrator
that makes sense.
as to.
It's still the town budget, but it's not from that budget line. There's a different budget.
Typically,
account, yeah.
capital items which are looked upon as items or projects of $10,000 or more would be included in the capital budget. Now, so it doesn't need to be that each individual item is going to require $10,000, okay? It could be a project, and a project could maybe have, let's say, for example, 10 items. 10 items regarding accessibility in maybe one building may be looked upon as a capital project. And so we'll have to double back on this with, among other people, the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, to see how nuanced they have gotten as far as what they consider a capital project. Because even if, switching gears from the cost of an item, I would think that no matter how new an item is, the fact that it may be ADA non-compliant necessarily renders that item or service or whatever searching for the word, obsolete.
Right.
It would render it obsolete. And I would think that that would bump it up a notch regarding priority within the capital budget. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are on that, but
No, it probably is an extensive process, so we need to be educated on this so that we can apply some of this information here
Right.
into the budget planning process for next year, as well as for a 5-year look down the road into the future.
and I don't think realistically we can rely on grant monies to fund all of this stuff. Even with grants, typically a granting authority will say, you know, you need to have some skin in the game and prove to us that you're acting on part of the funding. In the same way that, you know, we funded a new library or a new school, that the town says, okay, we're going to put forth X amount of dollars, and some other funding mechanism at the state level is going to put forth the remainder. So, so some of this at various intervals will necessarily make its way into some type of request for funds, and that would be through town meeting.
What kind of dialogue have we had with the various agencies, however you want to call them?
We,
Individually, like, you know, the
I've-
senior
I've-
center, have we spoken with them regarding how impactful some of these things might be in
I've
terms of?
spoken with, even though we haven't tackled yet recreation facilities, and I think that starts in section 9 on page 82. I've spoken with rec on.
Yeah.
Have they been to it? And forgive me for not having.
Not yet,
yet.
but
Okay.
they were more than willing, and I'm embarrassed that I forgot her name. Who's the rec? Okay, Jen Anderson.
Jen.
Sorry, Jen.
It's okay.
I spoke with Jen at length last month, and her willingness to really address these items so that we're not starting from scratch. We're not duplicating our efforts. We're working together, and she was willing to come before us.
Right. I'd like for her to come too, because like as I've said previously, I did speak with her some time ago just as a parent,
Right.
to reach out to discuss some service provision, not necessarily just the physical,
Right.
making some, I guess, disabilities friendly programming for our
Right.
community, and that maybe is something we could kind of discuss with her all at one time if she were to come before us.
Right.
Right.
And she was very responsive to that.
Yes.
Very responsive at the
Right.
time when I spoke with her.
Right. And so it could either be in the course of one of our regularly scheduled meetings or a workshop meeting.
Right.
That, you know, and this discussion actually wasn't only, regarding recreation, wasn't only about the facilities and programming. We had actually had some discussion about Grafton Celebrates the Holidays.
Right.
And the nature of all the venues and
Right.
how accessible these venues were structurally, and whether there may be various venues that could offer various activities or even quiet space.
Right, and I've spoken
Sensory
in
activities,
my
right.
CPAC role. I've spoken with the school department
Right.
people and the principals and some of the related service providers, and have come up with some preliminary ideas about how some of those, like the Oktoberfest and some of the
Right.
school activities, could be made a little bit more sensory friendly.
Sure.
Like you said, quiet space and things. And again, everyone I've spoken to, farmers market everywhere,
Right.
has been receptive and open to that. It's just a matter of bringing everything together
Right.
and making it come together. So I think
Yep.
just an overall comment, having read the report, is just that, and we had said, a lot of the building requirements are here, but
Right.
more, I would like to eventually go back through
Right.
for each one of these and speak to it from a service
Sure.
level.
Right.
Of what can we do? A lot of those things maybe aren't going to be as costly.
Right.
Things that we can just make some adjustments or some
Right.
small changes. to
And,
make
and I
some
agree
time.
with you. One of the things that could happen is that regardless of how ambitious this whole document is, we could be sort of lulled into a sense of complacency that, oh, our work is given to us. We don't have to do anything else. But there's actually a lot of things that we can do that are not contained in this document. Even on the, this is just the municipal side. The school side isn't even contained in this document,
Right.
nor a lot of programming issues are contained. So
Right.
we'll have some good work ahead of us in that
Right.
arena. So, and that's where you're going to wear many hats.
Right.
So,
I think it's also a good way for us to have the, to engage the community
right.
in this and to
Right.
kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah, having it, well, we need to impact those who can't speak for themselves. And
Right.
that's our kids, you know, in some degrees, everyone's still learning about how to not only implement the physical, but how to be more inclusive overall.
Right.
You know, the schools have done a great job, but they're not the end all. They still need to do work as well.
and they're still learning
Yeah.
as well with some things and have been open to some feedback from the community as well, you know.
Yeah.
So we're all still kind of learning together some things. Like you mentioned Grafton celebrates the holidays as an example, like having designated sensory friendly stops
Right.
that meet specific criteria for being that way
Right.
would be helpful to be listed
Right.
with the symbol on the map.
Right.
That would be something we could do that would be very minimally
Or even the trolley
Yeah,
that
the
goes
cost of
around
animals,
being,
Right.
you know,
wheelchair-
Is
Yeah,
it
exactly.
wheelchair accessible?
wheelchair
Yeah.
accessible van for
Right.
transportation. So we
Yeah.
we have a lot to do as educators and sort of advocates and such. And so that's where we had discussed at prior meetings, not only having our regularly scheduled meetings, but having workshop meetings as well.
right.
So
Have we thought about doing a survey that we could send out
I
to the
don't
community? Could we, you know, in terms of what they.
I don't think we've discussed that yet, but that's a good idea.
Okay. That's something we would have to obviously develop and what would be,
Right.
what was appropriate to put on there, but just reaching out
Right.
to kind of just say, hey, what would you like to see? What concerns do you have? Just kind of.
And I think another along those lines, Missy, is also working with the other boards and committees and departments to also see how we can collaborate rather than reinventing the wheel, you know.
Right.
That we don't have to do their work for them. And that's where, like, for example, recreation, they're like, you know, Jen is totally on board with what you're speaking to regarding the activities and the programming. And so we can help and coordinate that without actually having to take on all of the actual work.
Right, like we would maybe reach out to the school department and ask their related service providers, maybe their OTs or their PTs or whoever.
Right.
To behaviorists there, you know, to maybe help to donate a curriculum to
Right.
her. And then that would be something that they could do to facilitate that outside of school experience to kind of increase that social contact for kids who wouldn't otherwise have
Right.
that.
And
Maybe
that's-
for adults too. I don't want to, I mean, I know I
Right.
work with kids. I don't want
As
to.
accessible,
Right.
as disabled kids grow into disabled adults.
Everything
So-
else like 22 years old.
They
so
do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they do.
Weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And then there's also the idea of establishing maybe like an example accessibility audit. Perhaps like giving a list of to the rec department and the school department and stuff and being like, this is how you conduct an accessibility audit. This is the list of questions you should take and keep in mind. And if you can't meet everything, like we understand, but
Right.
this is what, if you say you offer this service, this is what you have to actually have in order to offer this service and
Right.
things like that. So.
Right, right,
Right.
at a high level, like a sort of, a questionnaire, and along those lines, capturing it, memorializing it through links on our webpage.
Yeah.
I've looked at other cities and towns, disability commission, however they're named, commissions on disability. There, some cities and towns have some very great, robust web pages, you know, so, you know, to borrow from some of those areas might not be a bad idea sooner rather than
maybe
later.
reach out and speak with some,
Yeah,
like some commission members in other
Right.
surrounding towns and see what's worked for them and
yeah,
what kind of events. Like some towns do sensory friendly trunk or treats for kids
Right.
who can't handle the waiting and going from door to door and the transitions and just see what kind of programming they have and seeing what's worked for them might just be a good place to start as well
Sure.
as a survey
right,
would be my two starting places.
okay. you
Yeah.
writing this all down. Thank
Yeah.
you, Madam Step In.
Yeah, I know,
Clerk.
really, no problem.
Yeah. December's always a tough time.
Yeah.
With the holidays and such, to to maintain, full membership sometimes, but, we're here, so.
And even with like the local organizations like the Grafton, the Night Out, I always take my kids to that, and that's historically been a pretty sensory friendly thing. But just
Right.
reaching out to those other organizations who are trying to do the same thing we're doing and saying, hey, we see you, and what can we do to make this
I'm
work
actually
better for
looking
you?
forward to National Night Out. That's what you're
Yeah.
referring to, National, yeah.
Well, that too, and also the movie nights.
Yes.
Yeah, the movie nights have been excellent.
Right.
So
Now,
I mean,
was there a sensory-friendly movie night?
I believe it was listed as sensory friendly, but I'll
Okay.
be honest, all of the movie nights have more or less been sensory friendly in that there isn't a feeling of understanding in the way that it's set up. Like there's no judgment if kids are walking around, and, so it's been more about just taking your kids to a place where they can enjoy a movie without
Right. Well,
The
having
stigma.
to necessarily.
yeah, all kids, regardless of their profile,
Right.
they can only sit
Right.
for so long,
Right.
So it's just inclusive overall. I think just globally inclusive,
Right.
without being specifically inclusive.
That
but
you
I
have
think
to
that-
maintain,
Right.
all right, you need to be in that seat or be stationary for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe it would be helpful to make a list of those services that are happening locally and
Mm-hmm.
those smaller things too, and just reach out to the people who are running those things and
Right.
kind of just make contact.
Good idea, and along those lines, one of the things that it's a self-reminder, is that for all of the efforts that are put forth by the boards and commissions, I don't think there's a whole lot of people that read the annual report of the town. And as I've started to read through it, there are some opportunities there that relate to the work that we will be doing. So, anyway, including trainings and such, so.
Right.
Awesome. So on 55, page 55, and what's interesting about this, I'll make a note, 2 comments. The irony here is that for a self-evaluation regarding disability, the print is microscopically
I know.
small, okay? So, and I wouldn't identify as someone with low vision, but this can be a difficult read. Is everyone okay right now with the font? Are you,
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, some people may have difficulty with the
We do
font
have
size. Not so much in.
Magnifier here if anyone
Okay.
needs
Oh,
it.
yeah, that's right. Okay.
No judgment, Roger.
No, okay. In reading through these 25 or so pages, okay, since our last meeting and recently, over the past couple of days, rereading this, I was looking how even these 25 pages could take an excessive amount of time to really get lost in the weeds, and I didn't want to get lost in the weeds regarding all of the detail, other than trying to maintain, as I said at the outset of the meeting, the priority levels, okay, as well as and aside from the price, the rankings 1 and 2 can be done they're presumed to be done according to the report. Number 1 was can easily be undertaken, moving furniture, putting a sign on a wall. Ranking 2 can be undertaken by maintenance staff like DPW, installing a poster, a sign, and such. Aside from just looking at it from a monetary standpoint, the combination of the priority and the ranking, a lot of these could be done within the next year or 2. I mean, a huge, just a number, not necessarily importance, but really, I mean, tackling this without just talking a whole lot about it and continuing to talk about it, just really tackling these things head on, including getting these things funded and seen by community leaders as as a priority, not just the leaky roof, but accessibility issues. So,
I think we need to go through this and get some advice as to any grants or anything that are available that maybe we're not aware of
right,
for some of this too. I mean, I
Well,
don't
we've
think we have
already,
a-
there is an annual grant that we just applied to, and our assistant town manager applied, and we're waiting to hear the status of the application. So an application has already been funded, and we can do it once a year. So,
and that was for the ramps outside, the two ramp areas outside of this building, and it was 50,000. And it's through the Mass Office on Disabilities Municipal Access Grant Program. So the Mass Office on Disability, my understanding was supposed to make a decision and announce it at some point in December.
Okay.
Well,
I was hoping we had heard something, but not
I
yet.
know.
Maybe they've had too many snow
Right,
days.
Right. So I actually had spoken with Dave Moradian
He was
about
supposed to
this, and he was going to reach out to the state to just put another voice forward in this. So,
Okay.
yeah, so we'll see.
Well, as you look through the buildings, I'm really pleased to see that they said, and it really helps us that, like, the community house really has minimal use
Right,
versus like the senior center, the police
Right.
station, high use. They also state on page 75 that for Station 2 and Station 3, they don't comply to accessibility requirements, but they are closed to the public.
Right.
No business is conducted.
Yeah.
So
Physical
no further
requirements.
action is
Right.
required. I mean, they are really non-compliant, but no problem. We're not going to really focus on them. So I think when we go back through and look at this holistically, we're not going to be jumping into Nelson Library, the community house, to repair things right
Right.
away. We're going to look at those high-use areas, the high-volume use, especially the municipal center, the senior center, the police station. And I still think it is shameful that buildings built in 2006
Yeah.
are non-compliant.
Compliant.
Right.
I just want to say that, and shame on the police department. Anyways, that's another day.
right. And,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say.
Whoever approved and wrote off
Right.
and said these
Yeah.
permits and
The,
everything were okay.
The allegedly accessible
and
holding cell that is like egregiously non-accessible.
Right. So I don't know if people need to be educated, if they need more professional development, but some of this, I
And I
know
don't think
slows
the-
down things, but it needs to be done right, so we're not going back and having to spend more money.
Right.
So,
And I would want to engage those folks. I know that a lot of folks had mentioned that. I wouldn't necessarily expect, I think many would expect the leadership at each level of department heads, you know, the police chief or, fire chiefs or whomever to
School
know.
department head.
School department,
Right.
but to know these things and
So they might be misinformed. So taking it from the perspective
Right.
that they're misinformed rather
Right.
than
right, we need
acting in
professional development.
impunity would be
Right.
maybe.
And,
Yeah.
and I just want to be careful that for a commission that is among various committees and commissions that as a group, that I'm not saying that we give people a free pass, but and I'm just speaking for myself, caution against the, like finger pointing and such,
Right.
to people that aren't here to defend themselves.
Right.
So I wouldn't want to create an adversarial relationship out of the gate. I would
Right.
want to come forth as an educator.
Right.
Okay.
Take it from that misinformed perspective rather
Right,
than.
right.
Yeah.
And
That's what we do at CPAC.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, too. It's just we try to disinform.
but I do agree with you. I am very surprised that a building this new,
It's not a complaint.
yeah, even from the slopes, the exterior slopes that they're talking
yeah.
about.
Yeah.
That, the railings that would be needed, if you don't tear it out and level it off, the railings and such, just on the left and right hand side. I think the left-hand entrance of the police department was more non-compliant in slope than the right-hand approach. But you're right, the holding cells
Yeah.
and such.
Right.
That, in stepping aside though, along these lines, that we're having these discussions about newer buildings being non-compliant, at some point sooner rather than later, I would want to double back with the library building committee to make
Yeah.
darn sure
Yeah.
that we don't find out that once that building is largely complete, that they're at a point of no return and having to tear things up due to non-compliance. I would hope that all of the owners, project managers, all the architects, all the design work, that everyone is completely in tune and would pass this type of scrutiny, this type of evaluation scrutiny with flying colors.
Yeah.
I think some of these situations too, people have been handed from previous, when they walked into it, it wasn't necessarily that they
Right.
had a hand in it. They were just handed a building that was not compliant and maybe weren't aware of
Right.
certain things. So like moving forward, I don't think it's going to be difficult to work with anybody. I think everyone
Right.
ultimately will be committed to making things
Right. Right.
compliant.
And I think that we happen to just be in a more sensitive financial situation with the recent budget discussions.
Yeah.
Every item is getting scrutiny more than it
Right.
had done
Yeah.
in the past, because we're now considered, what is the official vernacular, a rich community?
Yeah.
But I don't recall the term minimal need or low need district, as far as almost having the schools nearly level funded. I think it's just a flat $1 million a year, and that won't maintain level service. And I don't want to get into that discussion. I mentioned that to say that it's interesting how, based on the Financial Times, that which may get scrutiny. It often happens at town meeting that we'll rubber stamp a $1 million item and then have a 45-minute discussion on a street light and the cost of a street light. And so we have to be prepared for those sort of micro discussions, while not getting caught in the weeds of the hundreds of items that are in this document.
Do we have this document in
No.
an Excel? Oh, I was hoping.
No, we don't.
Let's call them up and ask. No,
Right.
because it would be
Right.
great to be able to do sorts for
Yeah, to sort by
high
priority and
priorities,
stuff
high
like that, yeah.
cost, this,
Right.
you know.
I consider
What are we
doing that
using
myself.
as
I think
the basis for that decision, though? Is it the impact? Is it the cost? Like, I think we need to be clear when we're discussing what the priority is, what we're basing that decision on. And
They
I think
did-
we don't have enough time probably tonight to get into that
Right.
whole situation, but I think that's something that we will need maybe more time to discuss, and also more time with the various leadership and all of these groups to kind of hear, like especially this, like for example, the senior center.
Right.
I'm sure what's going to be important to them, what they find to be the most impactful, is not at first glance
Right.
what's listed here is most impactful. What's
Right.
going to prevent people from accessing things?
Right.
It may seem like a small thing, but maybe it's something that's a big barrier
Right.
that we could maybe, again, like those surveys might shed some light on that. And I think that getting those out in the beginning of the year might be helpful.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, they can act as educators to us.
Right, well, we would have to, because
Right.
they're the ones living in those
Right.
roles, so they're the best
Right.
people to.
Yep.
I think it would be really helpful to meet with them and talk. And then, in terms of some of that service provision that this report is a little light on, that might be a nice way for us to make a connection, and also to maybe pick some of that low hanging fruit, establish that relationship, and kind of feel a little
Mm-hmm. Right.
bit good about ourselves that we
Right.
work together, and then we can tackle the bigger things that are much more costly, and kind of have that working relationship already with them.
Right.
So I think that's a really good place for us to start.
It is, and I would say that along those lines, it is actually, if limiting the extent to which this particular report limits things to municipal, and with the exception of the town website, everything is physical structures, and actually that's a smaller percentage of the population that's impacted based on the physical structures versus, let's say, programming.
Right, programming, service provision,
Yeah,
sensory friendliness.
yep,
Again, like go back to the police department, training. Just a question about the training, what kind of training have they received
Right.
regarding working with individuals, interacting with individuals
Right.
with various disabilities? I'd be curious to see what they say.
The town report, actually, if you look on the town reports are online, okay? And the police department actually based on my own read, gets into the most detail about the trainings they've gone through. But they're listed. They don't get into further detail. I would want to see, you know, more of the details of those particular, what those particular trainings entailed.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who is trained. And we had spoken about that. We had touched upon
We
that
talked
at a
about
prior
that during
meeting.
our
if
Yeah.
you
first
recall.
meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
I apologize for kind of being not up to
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
my first time out the gate here.
You mean you haven't watched
I have,
all the
but-
videos on TV?
Yeah.
So enthralling.
There you go. No, I'm glad that we're being taped. And a shout out to Jack Kelly, whose 21st birthday it is today.
Yay, Jack.
Yeah, Jack, thank you for all your assistance in really, you know, making sure this is on air and in a high quality fashion. So
There was a program that they had a few years back that would help locate people if they were missing, that were at risk of wandering.
right,
There is a contact person for that. I think it's Sean McKenna for the Worcester
Okay.
Sheriff's Office. But I was told, and the article that I had forwarded.
that was the one. That was the one from 2015.
Right, and I had previously from one of my children had looked into it, but I was told that we would need 8 people.
8
I'm not sure
people.
I'm not sure what the participation is
Okay.
at this time for that, but I would be interested in revisiting that. And I know that that was something that Chief Crapo had said that
Right.
if the interest was there or something. So I would like to reach out on that too and say,
Okay.
hey, like, is there any? Where are we at with that? Is that something that we could still access, or is that something that maybe there was a grant for it and
Right.
it ran out or something? I don't know what the status of that is, but that would be something that would be
You
Helpful
writing this all down?
to inform, maybe to look into and maybe provide information to our.
Well, let's put that on the agenda for a
Yes.
further meeting,
Right.
Yeah.
because right now we're
Right.
trying to
Yeah.
stay
I
in
know.
here,
And I
and
think
we're
it-
going off on a
And
tangent.
so I'll agree with you on that. And so
So I'll make a note for a later meeting.
I will say that you've preemptively, and I've allowed you to tackle the new business section of the meeting in advance. And so if you could just put that under new business.
I thought it was under like the
Yeah.
under the police
Well,
department, so I didn't want to.
Yeah, it's tough.
around.
It's easy to, you know, and it's not finger pointing. It's easy for
Right.
me too, to go off on these side trips, because we want to tackle as much as possible. But I would say that, yeah, if you could put that under new business.
Okay.
That we've already had that particular piece of the discussion.
Sure.
But so the Nelson Library, I know that, they're not open every day, are they?
Oh, they're minimally
They're
open.
minimally open. One of the things too is that what I liked about this report is that although the various items are memorialized in a graph format regarding the item, the ADA and the AAB applicable sections, and then the priorities, you can get a real sense of the main issues based on the sort of executive summary, I'll use that term, the
Yeah.
executive summary of the deficiencies or how these areas are compliant before they get into those specific areas. But back, Christie, to your comment, I think it's only in Word document. You talked about Excel. Even though you would have thought, even though this is formatted in a way that seems like it's Excel, my understanding is that it's a Word document. And so this can't be sorted without someone actually going in
manually doing
Physically transferring
and
it.
physically doing this whole document, which absent, if you exclude pictures, I bet it's about like 90 or 100 pages of information. I don't know if I would be up to that task. But it's a recommendation that if we do tackle any future self-evals, including the schools, which, need to be tackled, that the scope of work includes the ability to have us presented, that be presented also in an Excel format, so we can sort that data. Because I'm finding a
Yeah.
particular frustration that I would like to see what the totals were for all these applicable sections.
I know, right.
And
Yeah,
you know,
I
how
went
much,
through-
There's no formulas.
I went through last month and totaled all the ones we did last month,
Right.
but That was very tedious,
Right.
but
And so I would like to be able to do the multiple sources, say what are the other priority ones in the municipal center and what do they cost? Or how many priorities are, you know, in the various, parks and such.
So are
And
we
that
like-
doesn't exist.
Are we
Right,
totaling
right.
things and then taking those totals and having that conversation with the leadership and them and saying, okay, so here's what the total cost of everything is. What of these things is the most impactful to you there? And then using that information, layering that in, like, do we have kind of like a game plan for how we're gonna ultimately
We have
this
order
time-
things still? Is it, we're still not there
This is
yet?
our third meeting.
Yeah.
no, I think it's fourth.
Fourth
September-
meeting.
Yeah.
Fourth meeting,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think we're still hoping, because we still haven't really had that liaisonship with the selectman's office. We still haven't had a select person come to a meeting and really liaison with us to really.
So what we have right now is, initially, Doreen DeFazio was the select person rep, okay, the select board rep, to this commission. And there were two meetings, and one was a conflict, that was a select board meeting. And then what ended up happening is when, Donna Stock, got elected to the vacancy, from Bruce Spinney, what happened is Doreen stepped back as a select board rep because Donna Stock was already a member, so she became the select board rep to this commission. Okay, there didn't need to be two select board reps. So, so we will, rather than try to reinvent the wheel and speak with the, various town leadership directly regarding the town administrator's office, I think Donna Stock could do a lot of that as a select board rep,
Okay,
to this commission.
that would make the most sense,
Yeah.
I think, as well.
Yeah, and so, she doesn't know it yet, but we're gonna really throw all this work at it.
I'm told.
Actually, all of the members, Donna included, have been really more than willing to really, step up and really contribute, to achieving these goals, so.
Plus, this is so ambitious. It's hard to say, let's do this and then let's do this. Like,
Right.
we're still working to define the scope of what we're working on.
Right.
And it's, the idea of asking Chief Crapo, because there's training going on all the time for train the trainer models, to how to work with individuals with autism, et cetera, et cetera. I know our police department does that, but here, I'm not sure. But right now, we're trying to do this first and then move other things. So there's so many moving parts. I think right now, we're just trying to get through this. And if we can accomplish that stuff as the year goes on, that's great. But I think our first task was really, the priority was
Right.
to have us chew on this, because nothing has happened for how many years, Roger? 5 years, like
5
6
more.
years?
Okay,
So
so are
we've
you talking
lost-
about this commission?
No, yeah, so we're
Okay,
really
right.
we're really trying to still digest all of this.
This commission had kind of been inactive from 2011 up until this past August, September. It had a membership that kept on being reappointed without there being any known meetings. And so that's where I kind of thought things over, and I came before the board in June. So let's revive this thing, and I didn't even know that at that time this transition plan was moving forward. So everything the timing was pretty good, but still, this commission, as revived, is in its infancy. So
So it's a big task we have ahead of
Yeah.
us. So developing a process by which we digest all of this is going to be
Right.
important to kind of make a,
And then share it with
some
the
kind of
others,
formula
yeah.
that we
Right.
have for addressing these
Right.
things is going to be
And,
important.
and I think that, to my earlier comment about town websites and city websites regarding disability commissions, that a lot of other places, do have televised meetings that we could look at. The minutes are posted online, but we have the opportunity to, double back with a lot of these people to actually, elicit their opinions as to how what is the process for actually getting things done. I don't want to try to get, guess at how they should be done if we can sort of model some successes
Right.
throughout the state. So,
And keep aware of all those grant funding
Right.
opportunities, yeah.
Yeah.
right.
And just not to discount the power of community engagement in getting these things done.
Right.
So that's
Right.
been a challenge in my other role, is getting people engaged, and now we're orchestrating ways to kind of connect with people who may otherwise not able to attend a meeting or not
Right.
able to engage in the way that, once a month at Tuesday night or whatever, to kind of reach out and kind of, let them know, like, hey, here we are, we want to engage with you. So
And we also have an email address too. If people want to reach us as a committee, it's disabilitycommission@grafton-ma.gov as well, to get that out there, as well as have maybe some social media presence. But being mindful that we're not having serial discussions behind the scenes that would be in violation of the
Yeah.
open meeting law. That is one of the things that we all of us need to be mindful of too.
Right.
That that we're not all replying to a person who has sent us an email, because what happens if someone sends us an email, we're on the distribution list. When I sent the Disability Commission the agenda, it comes back to me individually as well, because I'm on that distribution list. So, that's something that we could be mindful of while putting forth that social media effort, and getting the word out about what our work is.
Yeah, and we're just beginning to, it's only been 3.5 months. We're promoting ourselves and asking people to let us know anything that concerns them. So,
Right.
luckily, right now, we're not getting a deluge of requests for anything right now as we get our feet wet and figure out the lay of the land here.
And I think the important thing is, even though we've put forth this ADA self-evaluation, which we're actually putting our own feet to the fire, but rightfully so, I think that having this in place and having this commission, meeting every month and tackling this stuff, that if any authority were to come down on any non-compliance issues, that we could basically show them that we're acting in good faith, that we're trudging along
Right.
to tackle these issues.
And if you listen to the meeting between the school committee and the select board, it's the same thing everywhere. This is a huge task. How do we work together to
Right.
make this happen? So it's overwhelming. It is. It's a big.
It
It's a
is.
big project, but
And it's done by largely volunteers who
Right.
have lives outside of the meeting.
right. Already overtasked people
Right.
who've are probably overcommitted, but still dedicated to getting it done.
Yes, definitely.
So do you want to table any further delving into the Nelson Memorial Library piece?
I really,
When is it open? And
Do the Girl Scouts use
2
that
or
for something?
3 times a week and maybe a Saturday for 2 or 3 hours, I
Right.
believe.
And I think that this has been a really sensitive subject, because I know that a lot of people really hold that space near and dear to them, regardless of accessibility issues. That is a part of town and a facility that people in the past extensively used when it was fully operational. And so, not to politicize this, but I wouldn't entirely dismiss it. I'm just saying that I would table this, recommend tabling this particular item in lieu of focusing on higher use facilities, at least at this juncture.
And I agree, and I believe,
Only
That-
the main
this-
branch hours are listed on the website.
Oh,
Only the main branch hours are listed on the website right
Okay.
now.
yeah, you have
Doesn't
to go to
look
the
like-
Nelson Library website, I believe, for the hours.
you are such a techie, and I mean that in the best way.
Well, all I did was Google Nelson
but
Library hours.
Catherine's always like boom, 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 and she like has it right there.
But
so
I
you're
think,
like the go-to
but I
person.
think the South Grafton Community Center kind of has that same,
Right.
Yeah, it's an as needed
Right, it's
facility,
only as
basically.
needed, it's
And
not
it's-
high volume.
And it's actually, of the facilities, it's completely inaccessible. It has front and back stairwells, am I right? Not
Well,
the South
no,
Grafton.
that's the-
no, that-
no,
I'm-
that's the
That's a
historical-
historical space.
At the South Grafton
That's the
Library.
Yeah, the
Does
former
that-
South Grafton
Former,
Library.
Right, that's what I'm referring to. The South Grafton Community House has accessibility issues, but people can get in.
Yes,
And so, I mean, right now, the town is going to have some serious discussions as to, and they've had these discussions in the past, but really haven't solidified, okay, are we gonna keep X, Y, and Z building open, or are we going to hold on to a particular facility, or, try to have it be volunteers, or just shut the doors altogether? And that's been a discussion item in the past, especially regarding, Nelson.
What would some of these things, would they change if some of these issues were not present in terms of like building use and everything? Or some of these issues with the building standing in the way of their use and preventing access use? Or is it just that they're not valued in that way? Like what's,
I really haven't dug into this. I know that some people would say that, maybe it should be a more focused, like a children's area or whatever, but, there are those who would say, let's have a more consolidated approach, to various services, i.e. one main library versus having multiple branches. Some people have looked at it as, back in the day, you would have neighborhood this and neighborhood that, and people would stay within their own neighborhoods. And now with people being more mobile, it's nothing for a lot of parents to drive their kids, 30 miles to some type of sporting event. Why couldn't they travel 3 miles to a center library versus a branch library? Part of that is a philosophical discussion, even if money weren't an issue,
right?
regarding consolidation of services.
I think we need community input on some of those decisions.
As far as just getting back to your survey,
Yeah.
yeah.
I do think that, at least for me, I would feel uncomfortable making a decision that is not based on this major structural deficit that we could not possibly, fund, and it wasn't, like that barring that, like a building that needed to be torn down or something. I think that part of what makes a community is like what you said, like people have memories about buildings,
Right.
and that investment might be at risk in some ways if the decision like that was made without seeking the
Right.
opinion. If it's made in that, just a quick decision, like even if the decision
I
makes sense
agree
on
with you,
paper, I
because
think it's
there
important to
are-
engage people on it.
In I agree with you. I regarding Nelson, I know that some people hold that space very near and dear and use it,
Right.
More
It's been
extensively.
talked about a lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
that subject has been a hot topic,
Right.
what to do with that, so for us to come right out of the gate and be like, that's out of the picture right now, I think there would be some feelings about it without at least reaching out.
well,
Right.
I think out of the picture has to be defined.
I agree.
Because it's still included in this.
Right.
So all of
That's
these
true.
have to be touched on.
Right.
And even they helped us by saying priorities. So if their priority was based on traffic, volume, use, building hours, and is it accessible to the public, you would see that it really actually is almost, as I can say, without personality as to what they recommend. Because the shame of it is the ADA's been in place since 1990, and they haven't done anything.
True.
So
Yeah.
let's go back to, we really need, it's been 30 years now. I get concerned over a space like the Historical Commission building, the old South Grafton Library, which is nowhere near accessible in terms of bathroom, entry, exit, anything
Front
in there.
and back are both stairwell. They're both
And
stairways,
accessible
correct?
parking, yeah.
Right. There's no on-site parking, correct?
Correct, right.
Okay.
So, I mean, when you think of, let's take the least accessible building, that's the building. That's the building in town that hasn't had any love or attention, probably since 1938, when it was built. Let me
Right.
see, or it was built in 35? No, 38.
Yeah.
So I get concerned about that building because I do want people to visit, and I do think it inhibits
The Historical
people from,
Society?
yes,
They've also been moved already.
yeah, this is
So
the building
that's-
they've been moved to.
Yeah, so this
Yeah.
this would now be the second time we're having.
So the historical,
You know.
but what's interesting is it's a town-owned building, but, so that is both the Historical Society, which is a non-profit, correct? And then the Nipmuc Nation having, office space there. And those are the two organizations, are they, that building is limited to right now?
I
Or-
don't see the Nipmuc Nation.
No, the
being mentioned.
Nipmuc Nation is actually in the one up the street, the
Okay.
South
Community
Grafton
house.
Community
Okay,
House. Yeah.
Yeah.
I continue to confuse that.
Wasn't there just an ask for
Okay.
funding for that?
Okay, so the Historical Commission stands as, it's standalone and they rent that space.
Okay.
Okay. So the Nipmuc Nation is, okay, so they're
Yeah,
part of
they're
the
in-
South Grafton Community House,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just interesting to look at this as a whole, and remember, we're just only looking at the portions that they, surveyed. We haven't even gotten really into anything related to the schools. We haven't even looked at the recreational facilities. So it's just, you can see how this will be, quite unwieldy to look at, sort through, make recommendations.
Right.
on.
That's what I meant by a process being developed in
Right.
order to help us, because I think there's a lot of emotional factors, there's a lot of financial factors, so what is the process by which we're going to digest this information? So we talk about it, we reach out maybe to people in that.
And I
whatever,
think a
then
lot
into
of
the
this,
select board, whatever.
and I don't wanna step on anyone's toes either, I mean, granted, I had actually reached out to Jen regarding rec, but she reports to town administrator.
Right,
So we're appointed by the select board.
Right.
Who then hires the town administrator. I think a lot of these discussions, we don't necessarily need to be in the face of every department head. But I think a solid discussion about the parameters of who communicates what would be in order with Tim McInerney and Becca Meekins, the town administrator and assistant town administrator, as to, I don't want us to really take away from, I mean, they report to him,
right.
okay?
I think it's not about giving those leaders of those organizations more power than that. I think it's more of just information gathering to
Right.
get a different perspective on how things work in practice
Right.
versus what we have on paper.
But as far
to
as,
kind of bring it to that other table.
and because they report to him, I'm wondering if maybe the lines of communication are closer because of that existing, relationship that he's overseeing various departments, like, let's say rec, for instance. So I just don't want to duplicate efforts that, if he's already in communication, let's say regarding some issue, I just want to make sure that or we as a committee aren't duplicating those efforts. And that we're on the same page, as to who's going to be in the, most frequent lines of communication with those people, okay? I don't wanna be just on, I mean, if, as they're reporting to the town administrator, for example, and there's work to be done, I just wanna make sure that we're on the same page with him, that we're not just like, starting them down a path to disrupt their existing workflow,
Right, no, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think we envision different, different things when we talk about that communication, though. I think it's just a matter of, like, again, like, just to use the senior center, for example. We have this document that says what the priority is for
Right.
things. Maybe there's one small thing, a very leaky faucet or a bathroom
Right.
door that won't shut, and somebody won't go because the
Right.
bathroom door, I'm just making this up. Completely fictional.
Yeah.
I'm making it up. I'm just saying, like, maybe like, oh, the door doesn't really lock really well there, so I don't go because I'm afraid the door's gonna open. Like little things like that.
But
like,
I would be more inclined to speak with Tim about that than for one of us to go to one of the maintenance people and say, hey, you know what? This is leaky.
I would
In
think
other
the
words-
survey would be the best way to do it, and then he could use that information, and we can kind of do his homework for him via that survey.
Right.
Like send it out. They could write whatever they write in the survey. Patrons, whoever's using it, could fill it out,
Right.
And then that information would be sent up to Tim, and he could use that information to kind of. Does that make sense?
And so I would want to engage him about, eliciting his ideas on the process and maybe how to go about that, and
Yeah.
if he's done that before, and his involvement or Becca's involvement regarding committees either here or elsewhere as to their familiarity with what you're recommending.
Right.
I don't
I
want
don't
to.
know what his. I don't, and
Right.
I'm not saying because I don't think he's doing that. I just
Right.
at some point somebody, him, us, whoever, whatever makes most sense.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. I just want to make the best use of our time. We're going to meet 12 times a year plus
Right.
any workshop meetings. And
Right.
so I want to be able to be as efficient as possible.
Right.
And for the using Jen Anderson as an example about if she's going to take the ball and roll with this, and she's familiar with this document, and will be if she already hasn't read through it, and can sort of be almost her subcommittee of one to our activities on the side without us having to duplicate those efforts or try to take things off of her her lap that she may already be tackling, but absolutely the communication needs to be open. I agree with the survey. I just want to make sure we're going about it in the most efficient way
Sure. No, I agree with that.
and using best practices. I've never been involved in such a survey. I'm not sure if anyone here has.
The only survey I've done is for the library.
Okay,
We're getting ready to put one out
okay.
at CPAC.
Police station. Chief Crapo, eliciting his thoughts either directly or through the town administrator as to, his thoughts on these items. I am going to, hope that the various, department heads and buildings and those overseeing them in this report, that those people are familiar with this report, but, that's a leap of faith. I don't know if, Chief Crapo has read this and what his thoughts are, but I would want to elicit his thoughts either directly or through, town administrator, regarding pages 63 through I keep on flipping 70.
At least the, right up here, this building is the best and most compliant in terms of the scope that they defined.
Right.
Many of the items are all minimally, we need to lower, we need to go up an
Right.
inch, down an
The
inch.
signage.
Yeah,
the
signage, we need a
right.
grab bar,
That
I
grab
mean,
bar thing stood out to me with
Yeah.
the prevention of suicide risk.
Right.
Right,
And then the other pieces were pretty much moving exercise equipment so that there's a 38 inches between items.
Right.
I mean, some of this was just really, what a relief,
right. There aren't many, there are very few priority item one on the police, department. And some have to do, they're like no cost. They're like exterior front entry,
Yeah.
adjust, door closing speed
Right.
to be the required no less than 6 seconds.
Second.
Some signage. The biggest cost item, that is of a higher priority and up to 5,000 is the accessible route to the main entrance.
Yeah.
Regarding the, 8+ degree slopes that are listed on page 65. So you either put railings up or do something structurally to the grade that makes the slope no greater than 5%. And then there are other recommendations here. So that's us up to 5,000. So that's really the highest cost item that fall within priority items 1 and 2. Then there are various items that say 0 to 25,000.
That was kind of what I was going to ask you about. That one, 0 to 25,000. On page 67, the level 1 women's and level 1 men's bathrooms. But then there's recommendation to take no other action at the present time on that one. Modify and reconfigure as may be required
Yeah.
in the future as a reasonable accommodation request.
And it says it may be necessary to combine the bathrooms into one single user unisex accessible bathroom. I'm wondering if that isn't what would necessitate the higher cost. That it regards structurally tearing
Yeah.
stuff out and modifying it to create an entirely new space.
Yeah.
So what,
Yeah, that looks,
and a lot of this stuff is above my pay grade, although it speaks specifically to
9 and 10.
police,
Photos.
holding cell guidelines. Not, I mean, it's not only the ADA or AAB stuff, it's federal guidelines regarding, holding cells and such. So, a lot of this stuff is within the expertise of the police chief. But I would wanna to elicit his opinion regarding this particular report. I don't know who's read it and who hasn't,
Right.
you know? When they talk about the fire stations, it says overseeing the various stations overseen by the Board of Fire Engineers.
Right.
And, Chief Mickey Gothier, and whether he and the Board of Fire Engineers has read the report. I think that is also a higher level survey of, okay, have you read the report? Here's the
Yeah.
link, here are the pages, what are your thoughts? And then coming back to us, and us working together as opposed to just being on our own and trying to tackle these things. There's no way that we can just tackle this as a committee without working with
Right.
other boards and commissions and department heads,
Agreed.
so.
Yeah.
Entirely.
So that goes up to page 70. So, I mean, I could speak to Tim about that, Tim McInerney, about the various levels of communication in going about the best way to go about communicating things. I mean, thus far, I just reached out to Jen directly regarding the
Right.
Grafton Celebrates the Holidays. I reached out to Mary Oliver directly regarding her having come, ahead of time and then having come before us last month regarding the tax abatements. And both were more than willing to discuss and come before us, and Mary did, and Jen is willing to come before us, but I want to be careful that I'm not, or we're not just trying to reprioritize their existing workflow.
Right.
And that would entail keeping our lines of communication open, both with the select board through Donna, and the town administrator.
Right.
And so,
I think communication is gonna clear up any questions we have about what's the best process.
So Historical Commission Building, South Grafton Library. Responsible party.
So if you notice the priorities on this one, it's all about getting in the door.
Right.
Yeah.
there are a
It's
It's
lot
all
of pri-
about parking and getting in
priorities.
the door, and then
Yeah.
everything else is a
Secondary.
different number, but
Right,
yeah, this is one of those, that we talked about in a prior meeting where if you can't even get in the door, everything else is a moot point.
right.
Yeah.
So that's where we would have to start anyway.
Like
And
they talk
maybe-
about the bathrooms on the bottom of page 72,
Yeah.
50 to 150,000, priority 3.
Well, that's because if you look at their
Feasibility, right.
suggestion, they say don't even use it, which I agree.
Right.
It's this tiny,
Yeah.
tiny bathroom.
Right,
It makes more sense, like they say here, they should convert the rear access
Right.
of the building into the main entrance and have an addition in the back of the building to reconfigure the office area and add a fully compliant accessible bathroom.
right.
There has to be a grant out there with that name on it, the South Grafton, or the Grafton Historical Commission Building, just for that purpose alone.
Right.
I know that a lot of this stuff, the community preservation funds
Oh, yeah.
have been used for various purposes that could include an accessibility component. And among those were the limited use, limited access, or so-called LULA lift at the Center Library, as well as the One Grafton Common. What originally was going to be a LULA, but turned out to be the need to really retrofit that space and put a full elevator with the whole bump out in the back of the building.
Right.
Those are two projects that were initiated around like '09-ish. It was around the time that the Commission on Disability, so named back then, was meeting and endorsed both of those projects. So, and those are both involved the Community Preservation Act funds through the Community Preservation Committee, CPC. So that, but that can't be used for routine maintenance, so doubling back with Community Preservation Commission would be beneficial as to what are the guidelines or what are the parameters of what is routine maintenance versus some type of new project or the scope of new work.
Yeah.
You can build a new park, you just can't use the funds to maintain it on a
Right.
daily
Yeah.
basis, so. I would also note that, we'll probably enter into some type of discussion regarding clarifying what grants are available on the federal level. Recently, the whole Blackstone Valley corridor was designated in either as a federal parkland or in some way similar to it. And U.S. Parks Department and such, U.S. Department of the Interior would oversee those grants. And so kind of seems odd that we're kind of maybe sitting in the bounds of a national park as we have this meeting, but kind of seems like we are. So I know that, Worcester is talking about national park funds to help refurbish the old Worcester Auditorium. And so it's like, well, why is that? Because Worcester falls within that designation. That whole corridor, that whole federal corridor. So it isn't only capital item funds or the surtax, the property tax surcharges through the Community Preservation Act. There could be, and even state funds, it could be, based on that whole federal designation, federal funds available for these type of things. And this is all new. This designation is fairly new. So we may be surprised at the type of money that could be out there at the federal level to tackle some of this stuff. If we could identify and designate it as a historic asset. So,
Definitely worth looking into.
yeah.
Yeah. Especially since it looks like this is way beyond the scope of regular maintenance the suggestion here is basically a complete overhaul
Yeah,
of the building, so.
Right.
yeah, there's a lot to be done. This seems to have the most priority one items.
Yeah.
And it starts with the recognition in the preamble paragraphs that both the front and back quote-unquote entrances are stairways. So, and then the moving on to page 74, Grafton Fire Department, stations 1, 2, and 3. One of the, without, for lack of time to get into all of the specific items, one of the things I would mention is in skipping to station 2 and 3, the following sentence on page 75, all firefighters who use these stations must meet strict physical requirements which a person with a mobility limiting disability would not be able to perform. Therefore, no further action on these buildings is required. Should further functions be reassigned to these stations, including meetings, permit issuance, or other activities, then at a minimum, accessible parking and access into the station offices should be provided. So they recognize that the function of these buildings, based on the physical requirements, is different than the average employee.
Are they doing like CPR classes for the public in those buildings, or are they doing anything
No,
like that?
nothing.
It's just the
No.
firefighters and that's it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But then again, Grafton celebrates the holidays. I guess the activities would need to be limited to the accessible spaces.
Okay. So long as that was
Yeah.
known.
Or if there were a training, that it would be in the accessible spaces.
Okay.
I know that for a lot of trainings, the police department conference rooms upstairs have been used for various things. And I don't think it's only, I know MRC, the Greater Grafton Medical Reserve Corps, has used that space as well for activities. So,
But there are similar spaces available in town
Yeah.
to that space, like at the high school, there is
Right.
similar. Like we opted not to, through CPAC, to use, when we did the youth mental health first aid, we had the option to use the police department, and we chose the high school. And it wound up being a great space for it. So there are options,
right,
other,
Yeah.
that type of training. I mean,
Right.
it's not like there's no,
yeah.
Other options.
Yeah, there's a lot of space in town that
Right.
is accessible for trainings and such.
right.
But Station 1, which is fairly new, there's some signage issues which are low cost. Accessible route to the building from the parking lot. And there's some ramp railings, installation suggestions. It has to do with 6.5 to 6.9%. Part of this study, this ADA self-eval, speaks to sort of cost benefit, that if it's going to be an excessive cost for a minimal change, then those are things that we need to rethink. That if you're talking about like 1%, how significant is the difference between 5% and 6% versus if there were a slope of 12%, let's say, randomly picking a number. So although some things may be out of compliance regarding slope, some may not be as egregious. There could be different levels of non-compliance regarding the slope. So if you're talking about, let's say, $5,000 to create a level that is only 1% off versus something that may be 5% off, it may not be as much of a priority if one area only needs a 1% grade fix versus another area of town. If you're competing for the same funds, they may be off by 5%, let's say.
I have mixed feelings about that
Okay.
philosophy,
Okay.
but I hear you.
Alright.
I feel like making a decision like that maybe needs to have, like you said, kind of out of our pay grade to some extent. Like, I think there's some liability issues that may come up with some things
Right.
like that, like especially a heavily used, like if we're talking about that one space in front of the police department, that's used constantly.
Right.
Like, so that, even if it's a minimal amount, it would be something that, you know, we have to look at a lot of different factors, like, if it's a building that's used twice a year
Right.
and it's 1%, that would be a factor, maybe, at some point, still have to get to it.
I hear
But
you.
it's,
I hear
but,
you.
and like, just to bring my special education experience
Mm-hmm.
into it, I hesitate anytime money becomes the determining factor when it comes to making a change.
Right.
As long as it's on the table at some point, you know, the most, like, again, just taking in terms the impacts, taking, you know, all those things into effect, and not the money piece of it as a standalone
Right.
factor.
And I
Does that make sense?
and-
Kind of, it's a slippery
Yeah.
slope
Yeah.
kind of, so I just want to
It
be
is.
careful that we're not,
I
with
know.
good intention going,
But I
down
also
the-
don't want to, right, I don't want to politicize this, and but
Exactly.
I also don't want to ignore the fact that town meeting, whatever 200 people show up to town meeting could determine whether some of these funding recommendations are approved or get deep sixed. And, you know, so, as much as we as a commission may feel wholeheartedly that something would be a done deal as far as, yeah, let's vote for that and appropriate money. We're not the sole determinants of that. It's a
Right.
town meeting, so I don't want to ignore that piece that,
the input from the community.
yeah, you want as many people, at the table as possible agreeing ahead of time.
Right, and that
With these
data from the
ideas.
surveys would be kind of instrumental as well, and
Yeah.
just to have a number of saying, you know, 65% of people wanted this, or
Right,
didn't want this, or felt this was important, have been impacted by
Right,
this,
right.
you know.
and I would want to also then elicit the input from, Chief Gothier and the Board of Fire Engineers regarding, these items.
Right. How they feel. their
And that's an
priorities.
that was, you know, looking back in hindsight, it would have been nice for any one of us to have recognized this piece that, it's important that all these stakeholders are identified, but we haven't yet identified that they have read this and may have already formed an opinion on this,
Right,
or not. And
well,
so,
if they haven't, then we could present it to them. just
right,
Shoot it off to them and let
Right.
them read it at their leisure, and
Right.
then, hey, what do you think?
Right.
You know, and then that's, whatever, again, like, I know we talked about Tim, and whatever format that communication needs to take place, that communication globally, in any
Okay.
way that's the most appropriate, is gonna be instrumental in making this all make sense.
right, yeah, yeah, I'm not Superman. You know,
Right,
as I-
exactly.
I mean, this could be a full-time job, you know,
I
to
know.
tackle this report. Just the
Yeah.
municipal piece that's contained here, let alone the programming and school piece.
Well, we haven't even gotten there
I
yet.
know, I
But
know.
in terms of people's willingness to participate, I think that the people who are invested in, like, all of those people are gonna wanna have a say, so they're gonna help do that heavy lifting, I think.
Right.
They're gonna want to help do that because
Right.
they're involved with it, so we're gonna share that with them, I believe. They're gonna be interested in participating in that. So I
Absolutely.
think that we can rely upon our community members to help us out with this enormous task.
Right, that they'll be, once they're educated as to these areas, they'll be like, yeah, we want to rectify these things,
Right.
you know?
If they're looking at something that's driving them nuts all the time, that's an issue for them all the time, they're gonna say something.
Right, right. And
Something's
so,
coming up.
yeah, and I don't think it's, and maybe they've discussed it among themselves, but this is the first time we're seeing it on paper.
Right.
And it's memorialized, and so I would want to tackle a lot of these things sooner rather than later. I would love to see within the next couple of years, just picking a number out of a hat, for this report, if we redid it, would be,
Yeah.
two,
It might be the other way around
two-thirds
too,
shrunk,
like where,
right.
you know, you get a home inspection on a home you've loved for your entire time, and then you see the report and you're like, this is all these things, this work to be done, you know,
Right.
like, in reality, it may not be, the perspective might be different, so I think it's gonna be interesting to hear what they have to say
Right.
overall.
I think a lot of these in total, if we had an Excel sheet,
Yeah.
again, I understand that you don't rank things only by cost, but from the existing funds or the funds that we're looking down the pike at in the next, few fiscal years, that I bet you on a bell curve, a lot of these, like the total number, I bet you like 80% of this is like 20% of the money, just from a
Right.
funding standpoint.
Yeah.
And that we could really tackle a lot of this stuff, but being mindful of the places that are most used,
Right. Right. We just, like you said, we're not Superman, Superwomen. We can't be everywhere. We're not
Right.
experiencing everything. We're gonna get a lot. I think it's gonna feel a lot less overwhelming once we've done that.
Right.
Right now, it's like that. Okay, take a deep breath.
Right.
Well, you know.
Well, I think
pouring
that,
through these
I think
numbers
the
and
biggest
everything, it's just,
frustration for
all
me
noodles.
is, how quickly a month goes by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And playing catch up and no matter how much I've read this stuff, it's like, okay, it's always going to be a refresher,
Right.
needing to
Yeah.
read and reread this
And it
thing.
seems like you find something new every time you go through this too.
Right.
Right.
So-
Well, the detail is obsessively compulsive.
Yeah.
I mean, the coat hooks on the stall door are at 54 inches, which exceeds the maximum reach range under ADAC by 6 inches.
Yeah.
I know it's not a cost, but, we also have to remember there are people who will look at this and want the cost. So we have to be really aware,
Right.
Right.
especially the cost of labor to do a lot of this work. It's not, they're looking at just the materials when they look at that column there.
Right.
Yeah.
But can that code hook be moved down? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, maybe everything doesn't have to be brand new. We can make it, repurpose some of the
No,
things
you
that
can
we-
lower it, but what
Yeah.
I'm saying is then you're taking time to assign a work order. The work order has to be completed. That
Right.
person has to do it. The time
Yeah.
for that person to do it is
Take into account
given
the-
0.25 hours. I mean, there's just so much behind it that we have to be aware of. So,
And we're
but,
talking about some of this over 10 years, even though we're looking at it all right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
not like this all has to be done.
I know, and
By the end of
what I
next
want
year.
and what I want to happen, and what I want to avoid is that it's easy if you look in the town report, for instance, at all the boards and commissions that are active, and some are less active than others, and such. It's easy for some out of the gate, some commissions and committees to have some momentum and then lose some steam. And so I don't want that to happen here. Everyone here is dedicated. I don't want my comments to be misconstrued. It's easy for time to fly by. We all have lives and everything like that. I just want to make sure that we're moving forward on all of this stuff. And for me, that means ideally that it doesn't take 10 years.
Right.
I would
And that's
like,
not what I meant
Yeah.
to suggest that we have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying if we're overwhelmed, we need to
Right.
look at this as
Right.
a large undertaking that's going to take time.
right.
That progress will be made all that time, but
Right.
it doesn't have to all be done in the same year.
Right.
We can,
Oh, I know.
We can
Yeah.
work it out.
And even this report recognizes that,
Right.
so, anyway. Board of
way
Fire
out.
Engineers and the Fire Chief listening their opinion on this. And then tackling, I know that we had, excuse me, Section 9 at a future meeting, and well, first of all, any old business. I could have listed a whole bunch of things, but there's just 4 of us here, including
so
one new person.
So when we head into section 9, will that be at the same time when we come prepared to discuss that? Jen Anderson, do you think would be able to be
I
here?
would like to have her come in and discuss this. I know that she had indicated that she was after basically, she's been really strong for Grafton Celebrates the Holidays. That's
Great.
behind us.
Yeah,
That was a great success, in that she had indicated her intent to tackle the recommendations and data in section 9
yeah.
to have a discussion here. And so I could double back with her and see, her availability.
That sounds good, because we could either discuss it in January or February.
Yeah.
Can I make a recommendation about when?
Sure.
I
Sure.
think February, because it would then give us time to reach out regarding that other piece of business we had discussed earlier regarding the service.
Okay.
And that way we could maybe be able to have some communication regarding, those
So,
offerings as a possibility too. if there's
so, in other words, so even though we had, on a preliminary basis, talked about starting section 9 in January, it's probably best to have Jen be part of that discussion, so we could always table that to February and then, discuss other items in January. Now, I guess that would take us then to new business, of which we've already, tackled some of the, talking points. Were you talking, Missy, about the school, the services in general, or the talking points about what would be the next step regarding the school having its own ADA self-eval?
So you mean what I meant earlier about the school department not being included in this report?
Correct. In
So-
other words, what were your, both that, and does it play into what you would recommend we discuss at our January meeting?
Well, we did want to invite a liaison from the school.
Okay.
Right. I think we
Department
need to
to
be
come
clear
talk
as
to
to who
us.
is, who are our contact people in terms of clients at the school. We have somebody who does the building and the physical, right?
Right.
But who's handling the other service-related pieces of that?
Oh, that's a huge.
I know it is, but it's something that needs to be addressed.
Well, I think,
It is a
we-
huge deal.
I don't know if we want to go there until we have,
What I would like to do is just
yeah,
reach out and make maybe they've been talking about it. Let's say maybe,
well, I
okay,
think
so-
the executive committee is a school committee, and they
Right.
oversee, Dr. Cummings's job.
right.
And so maybe, Laura Often, is she the chair of the school committee
She is,
currently?
and I think just saying like, hey, we'd like to kind of get a feel for where you're at with this self-evaluation. If you're, who you've chosen or discussed choosing for an independent evaluator for that. What kinds of information will you be looking for
Okay.
in that? And just kind of I don't want to say a general ask, but kind of like a kind of general ask as to
Okay.
where they're at before we start asking them to do things. Let's just find out where they're at, and maybe kind of a rough timeline for when they expect,
So are we in agreement then,
we need to know.
that will be your task between now and then, and to speak to Laura?
I can do that.
Okay,
And I think sooner is better because it's
Okay.
going to be a big project, that whole, and again, with the budget and everything.
right.
There's a couple of other things that have, recent legislation regarding dyslexia and
Right.
other things that, we need to I think it would be better to kind of talk about these things now.
Right.
When we're talking,
And I know
when we're
they-
having these budget conversations to kind of,
And I know we
Yeah.
had a discussion earlier about, there's certain mandates coming down the pike in the spring.
right,
Okay,
right. There's gonna be a report due in April.
okay.
are they being required to do an ADA self-eval?
Let me pull up my,
Because, I
there's something
thought
else
they only
that's
have
new.
to, they only have to do one prior to capital building funds being
There's
released.
something due in April. Let me just open up my email really quickly. and-
Okay. So you're
Address
gonna
it.
ask Laura Oppen to come to our January meeting.
Or
can-
at least double back. I don't know if they will require the school committee to vote that she comes, or whether they've given her sort of carte blanche to attend various meetings in town.
Can we reach out via email in an official capacity to her and just ask her what kind of information we're looking for and
Yeah.
what would be the best format? Maybe we go to a school committee meeting and use our, ask to be put on their agenda to discuss it perhaps, or they could come to our meeting. It's really, it's gotta be comfortable for everybody.
Right, I think that, maybe just reaching out to see what
Okay.
may be in process already. And,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
It's just before we even go anywhere with it, I just
Right.
want to know where they're at with it
Right.
because
So we
right
want
now,
a status update.
right, and I do think that it's important to get some tentative completion. I mean, at least something. I don't know where they're at with it. I don't want to commit them to something if they haven't discussed it, but
right,
it's important.
right.
And
So
One-
it's
one of the-
timely when it comes to the very sensitive subject of the budget.
Right.
And I want to make sure it's considered.
Right.
So we're asking them for their status on current ADA compliance projects?
Who are their current representatives for service provision overseeing that,
Right.
as well as the building? If they're two different people, like I'm imagining that's very two different skill sets, that they were probably two different people. Who are the
Because
representatives?
right now on the municipal side, it's the building inspector
Right,
who is currently Bob Berger.
right.
Okay.
Okay, so we need somebody who's like, I guess it's the 504. Is
Yeah.
that, yeah, so that's
Usually it's the assistant superintendent.
Tracy, right?
Usually, but
And
I'm
she's
not
curriculum.
What I'm trying, what I
As
want
well,
to
so I don't know.
avoid, what I want to avoid is any one of us going off in many different directions, starting to contact all
Right.
sorts of people within the school system.
Right.
I want to kind of keep that communication central so that, we would be working more closely with the
School
School
accountability
committee.
plan, here it
Right.
is.
we're going on an hour and 45.
Sorry.
No, that's
Just want to
all
make
right.
sure
No.
we have this information.
Right, I know.
And I think, again, sooner than later is better to communicate because of everything that's going.
Sure.
The first set of accountability plans that school superintendents will need to prepare under the education funding overhaul Governor Charlie Baker signed into law last week will be due on April 11th.
So they,
I'm sorry,
they
April
may,
1st,
they may
rather, not
be
the 11th.
working on that, so let's see.
I've already communicated with Jay and
Okay.
Laura outside of
Okay.
Disability Commission from
Sure.
CPAC
Right,
to discuss it, but what it says is superintendents will need to consider input from parents, including special education and English learner parent advisory councils and other stakeholders like the school committee, teachers, and school improvement councils in preparing their 3-year plans. Under the law, the plans will need to establish targets and measures for addressing persistent disparities in achievement among student subgroups, identify evidence-based programs districts will use to reduce disparities, outline how Chapter 70 aid and other money will be used to implement the plan, and specify efforts to engage families, particularly for families of low-income students, English learners, and students with disabilities. So
Okay.
that's where we would just,
okay.
that's a thing that's coming up.
Not to throw a monkey wrench into this, but one of the things is that because of the scope and extent of the school piece alone, that makes you wonder whether or not, we're a commission of 7, and sometimes that is looked upon as kind of pushing the limit as to the size of a commission. I would argue, hey, we've had a finance committee of 9 members for years.
And there's such a diverse
I wouldn't,
range of experience we need.
I wouldn't mind seeing, I don't know what anyone else thinks, but I don't think it would hurt to have a school committee rep on this commission,
I completely agree with you.
You know?
I think that would be a great move to ask for that.
And so that's, I think that's going to be on our radar sooner rather than later.
And I don't think, just my own personal thing, I don't think they would be resistant to that if there were time.
It would be ultimately up to the select board to amend the charge.
I think if we
or
could justify the
Not
reason.
the charge, but, right, in other words, amend the membership or the scope of the membership to include, so you always want an odd number, so, you could always put another at-large, member and a school committee member. That's something that
Right.
I
I think it would be helpful to have somebody who's familiar with the
helpful.
504
Right.
piece of it. I'm not I mean, I know,
Right.
I bet I'm a one-man
Right.
army.
And I know
army,
that, you know, what we have here is, the good thing here is, in addition to the possibility that that could exist, that we eventually have a school committee rep, is that, Donna Stock and Daryl Reining are both former long-term
Right.
school committee, members. So between their, perspective and experience, along
Right.
with those who are actively involved in this,
Right.
including the budget piece too. that
And
we
if you
can't
heard
ignore.
if you heard the meeting, like,
I
it's
did
obvious
not.
that,
I
well,
did
I was
not.
there, but Donna definitely,
Right.
from her experience, had a lot to say that was very valuable in
Right.
terms of her previous experience
Right.
with it. I think it did
Right,
really help to facilitate the kind of the dialogue
okay,
of her experience, so.
all right. So do you want to then, table the rec piece to then February?
I think it would be helpful so that we can reach out, well, two reasons. One,
Right.
because of this school situation, and the other thing, also, just to give us a chance to kind of make contact regarding that other recreation piece, the adaptive programming that we were hoping to discuss. That's something that we can reach out with, or talk to her, and like I had discussed previous with her, just as a community member, maybe then have the time to go back to the school
Right.
and ask them, is there some way, just as an idea, can you maybe donate some curriculum for something like
Right.
adaptive intramural sports?
And it
or
may
some
be
kind of a,
premature,
you
it may,
know-
it may be not premature, but too late to really impact the spring programming, but
Right.
summer and fall programming could still be,
Right.
we could probably incorporate some things into the, even if the, spring, programs are,
I was envisioning
set
maybe even a
place.
drop-in because, you know, kids with special needs, like my kid with severe nonverbal autism,
Mm-hmm.
instead of having a parent pay for 6 weeks, maybe pay, you know what I'm saying? Like,
okay,
every day is a new day with
Okay.
with my kids.
Right,
So
right.
you don't know if you're gonna be able to make every, you know, so there's some input we can provide to that.
Sure.
Too, and I could also reach out to CPAC
Mm-hmm.
and ask if there's any other parents who maybe have some input to that. That gives me time in January to put it on my agenda
okay,
and reach out, shoot something out on the Facebook,
Okay.
communicate to parents, hey, what would you like to see if something was offered, just as a wish list,
Okay.
you know, and that way we can move that to February and kind of have time to do that research ahead of
Okay.
time,
okay,
and then move the other piece to January, just to give the school committee and
Right.
the school department more time,
Okay.
as much time as possible, to kind of be like they need another thing on their plate, but,
right, right, right,
you know, but
Okay.
sooner is better, I feel like, in that sense.
Okay.
Just to kind of start that dialogue.
okay,
And I mean very, very generally start having that dialogue
Okay.
without making demands or
Right.
anything, just to really
Right.
kind of be like, hey, where are you at with this?
right.
You know?
Right. We're one town, and I think a lot of times we've compartmentalized the discussion as to municipal versus school.
Right.
And I don't think that's a good thing.
When you turn 22 years old, you're now in the community, you're transitioning out of
Right.
the programming, and then there's there's a
Right.
drop off. You drop off, you understand this
Yeah.
with the major
Yeah.
work that you do. It's like falling off a cliff,
Sure.
and like just to make that landing a little softer
Sure.
would be great if we
Okay.
can do something to facilitate that.
All right. Then, any other new business then?
Can we just make something about that survey to kind of like, is there any kind of, when do we want to do that? Do we want to kind of put it on the agenda for the next time, or?
We could do that, and in the meantime, what I could do is I'll volunteer unless someone else wants to do it. Look around to see what other disability commissions are doing and make some reach out to clarify, even if it's not on a website, whether various disability commissions have done surveys and what the outcome of those have been. Is everyone okay with that? or-
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
The other
let's,
thing,
let's bring our ideas next meeting
Okay.
about a survey.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
a little hesitant about a survey because I know how much work is entailed in doing the survey, collecting the data, doing all the analysis when we have all of this on our
Okay.
plate. So I just want us to slow down a little. I feel like we've had a lot to think about. And right now, we have to make sure we're not surveying people who are also having other surveys going on. So we have
Right.
to be aware of what else is going on in town.
Right.
To asking, because we don't want to piggyback survey after survey after
Right.
survey.
Right.
So if we were to come up with a plan to really think about, what are we going to ask about this year? Next year, if we do a survey, what are we going to ask about next year? Like, we don't want to do a survey for the sake of the survey, but we do want to have a plan so that we know we're not just doing it
Right.
to collect information on this, when we could really be defining a broader scope and plan for asking for
Yeah.
input
Yeah.
on a more, not a case-by-case basis, but in a static way, so people can anticipate that they're gonna have a way to give us information. We'll maybe collect it in a different way and improve collection each time. I mean, so that's what I'm thinking about. So I just want us to slow us down this survey thing, because as I know from working with our population, we are asked to do surveys constantly. And I have to say to UMass, I'm sorry, no.
Okay.
My students get surveyed, are requested to survey, they get asked to be
So
participants
you're saying
in
we need to be more
studies.
sensitive to the recipients?
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right.
Maybe we just put
am I getting-
communication on our,
But we need to definitely look at
Agenda
our
then.
communication
Yeah.
too,
start that.
to collect information.
So is it agreed then
Yeah.
we'll come to the next meeting with more
Some ideas, yeah,
Okay.
let's start with that, yeah.
And then,
I do want to provide this to anyone who hasn't, this report to anyone who has not seen it that needs to see it.
right,
And who's a part of this.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that happens before we
Right.
meet again.
right.
If we can do that.
And-
That's
and-
something we can probably very
and-
easily do.
Yeah, and again, I'll touch base with Tim to see whether I could either do that directly or whether he feels that it may be a more organized, way to do things that it flow through the TA's office, to the various department heads and committees and commissions, not only the people that are identified here, like the Board of Fire Engineers, but, please read this
Yeah.
and see where it may impact you.
Yeah,
So I can, so you'll do the school piece, and I can touch base with Tim and see how, best to approach, getting this information disseminated to the stakeholders. And then come back to the, commission next month with a report as to who it's been distributed to and whether, we've elicited, whether we've received any feedback.
And like that's, I guess, is maybe, is kind of the halfway point between a survey and just maybe a feedback. Like, is there like any general feedback that you'd like to provide regarding this report? That maybe would be less onerous of a task to provide, like just with the report, like,
Right.
what do you think? Like one question, like,
yeah.
and like then they can drive that
They can get as detailed of
or
their
not,
own
yeah.
accord.
And that's, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that would be less intrusive, I guess.
Right.
I don't know if that's the right word, but
Here's the report, we are eliciting your opinion on the items here, just as a starting point.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you think so? That would be reasonable?
You,
Yeah.
all right, cool. You fading? Anyone fading here? Going on, thank you so much, Jack. Jack is back there going, all right, we're going on 2 hours.
Jack's like, where's my cake?
Where's my, it's his 21st birthday. But, all right, then if we're not, if there's nothing further, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
No, I need,
Oh, I'm a motion to.
adjourn.
adjourn
All right, so do I
meeting,
have a
yeah.
second?
Well, motion to adjourn. Yeah.
All right, seconded by
Second.
Missy.
Yep.
All those in favor of adjournment? Aye. Those opposed? Declare the motion carried.
Yes.
We're
Okay.
adjourned at what? 8:53?
Got it.
Yeah.